On the 16th of July 1991, things would get violent, while Frances Allie was still staying with the couple. This whole thing was caused due to some said missing substances. Rick James had searched for the things that he normally used to abuse, and apparently, his substances were missing. As a result, Rick James pointed a gun at the 24-year-old Frances Allie, claiming that she had stolen the substances. As a result, Rick James and Tanya Ann Hijazi decided to take the situation deeper and tied Frances Allie on a chair while she was naked. Over the next few days, Frances Allie spent her time there, and she was always burnt with the end of their crack pipe over 20 times. She was burned on her legs and abdomen during a week-long coke binge. Just after a day had passed after Frances Allie was chained to the chair, Rick James came to her and forced the young lady to perform some sexual acts. Frances Allie would perform these acts while Rick James stood there and watched. Still on that day, Rick James, together with his lover, Tanya Ann Hijazi, forced Frances Allie to smoke crack. Rick James decided to untie Frances Allie on the 17th of July 1991, and on this day, Frances Allie knew that she had to grab her opportunity by the neck. She managed to escape, and she fled from the house that Rick James was sharing with his lover Tanya. Frances Allie quickly ran to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, where she managed to get the proper treatment that she required. After she reported the incident to the authorities issued warrants for the arrest of Rick James and his lover, Tanya Ann Hijazi. The couple were arrested on the 2nd of August 1991. Later on, Rick James, together with his partner, who in this case was a literal partner in crime, were both released on bail. This was supposed to act as a lesson to the couple, but unfortunately, they were just not the type of people who would learn from their mistakes. In the year 1992, Mary Sauger, who was a music executive, met with Tanya Ann Hijazi and Rick James for business. According to Mary Sauger, things went from 0 to 100 real quick. The crack-fueled Rick James and Tanya Ann Hijazi would start slapping Mary Sauger over and over again. They took her to a posh West Hollywood hotel room known as the St. James Club and Hotel, where they held Mary Sauger against her will in the backdrop of the hotel room. The couple decided to beat her up for a period of around 20 hours. Eventually, Rick James was charged with assault by the use of a deadly weapon. He was also charged with torture, false imprisonment, forcible oral copulation, aggravated mayhem, and kidnapping in the cases of Frances Allie and Mary Sauger. During the trial, while Mary Sauger was recounting how she was aggressively beaten up until she lost consciousness and had to be splashed with water in order to regain consciousness, Rick James was busy sleeping in court. Rick James had fallen asleep so deeply in his own trial that he was even snoring audibly. In the case involving Mary Sauger, Rick James was found guilty of assault and false imprisonment. In the case of Frances Allie, most of the allegations that were made were not upheld. Due to the fact that Rick James had the best defense team that money could buy, the charges against him for torture were cleared, and so Rick James did not face life imprisonment. Rick James, the king of punk funk, was sentenced to 5 years in prison. He was taken to Folsom Prison, where he managed to only serve 2 years in prison instead of the 5 that was sentenced initially. The shortened prison term that he served was due to the prosecutorial misconduct that had allegedly taken place. Eventually, in a civil suit, Rick James was ordered to pay Mary Sauger a small amount of $1 million. Rick James was released from prison on the 21st of August 1996. In the year 1998, Rick James was accused that he had forced himself on a certain 26-year-old woman. Later on, the charges would get dropped. In the year 2020, there was another case that also came up. A certain woman came up to file a $50 million lawsuit against the estate of Rick James. According to this woman, Rick James had forced himself on her in the year 1979, when the woman was just 15 years old. She said that it all happened in Buffalo, New York, at a home for troubled youths. The issue of substance usage by Rick James did not begin when he was all grown. He started off as a teenager, when he was blazing doobies and using heroin. It was only until the late 1960s that Rick James started abusing coke. According to what Rick James said, he had quit using coke when he was sent to prison. But when Rick James died, the autopsy showed some traces of coke in his bloodstream. This means that Rick James was only lying about quitting coke as a publicity stunt. The abuse of substances that began when he was still a young boy would grow in his body that it even brought about major health complications. In the month of April 1984, a friend of Rick James found him unconscious in his house, and he was rushed to the hospital where he was admitted and bedridden. During a concert in Denver at the Mile High Stadium in the year 1998, Rick James suffered a stroke. The stroke was due to the fact that a certain blood vessel in his body had ruptured in the neck. Earlier in 1998, Rick James had undergone a hip replacement surgery which was meant to repair the damage from jumping around on stage and substance abuse.